Circle 8.
Circle 8.
Circle 8.
Welcome to Circle 8. Mechanics of neurosis. The continuous interruption of organismic flow for the person is what constitutes neurosis. A neurotic person is highly characterized as the individual who can hardly identify the figure from the ground. If not, he loses a sense of flexibility that only one figure stays for quite a long time, which would certainly affect the ongoing exchange of figure dominance from the moment to moment of experience. A clear example of the latter is trauma. It must be noted, however, that most of the common neuroses we encounter with people is not necessarily caused by traumatic experiences. As mentioned earlier, these could be the daily interference a person does in his daily life. Each of these interferences shall be discussed shortly. To understand neurosis, one must understand the role of the environment in the individual and vice versa. In the Gestalt approach, the individual is a function of the organism-environment field. Indeed, a man is both an individual and a social creature. In a sense, man needs others to survive. The basic point, however, is that although human beings live in a social world, as an individual, the person is also distinct from the very same world he is living. The implication is not that the environment and the individual are in constant odds with each other. Rather, both can benefit from each other as long as the interaction is worked in the context of an ever-changing field. The older psychologists described human life as a constant conflict between the individual and his environment. The Gestalt approach, on the other hand, sees it as an interaction between the two within the framework of a constantly changing field. And since the field is constantly changing, out of its own nature and out of what we do to it, the forms and techniques of interaction must necessarily be fluid themselves. What concerns us in this ever-changing field are the ever-changing constellations of the ever-changing individual, for he must change constantly if he is to survive. It is when the individual becomes incapable of altering his techniques of coping and interaction that neuroses arise. Perls, 1973. The individual finds the balance between his organism and the environment. In a way, he establishes a boundary upon which the distinction can be noticed. This boundary is called the contact boundary, wherein the individual judges what to take place and what not to take from the environment. For Perls, all neurotic disturbances arise from the individual's inability to find and maintain the proper balance between himself and the world. 1973. When the environment and social boundary extends too far over the individual, the neuroses commence. Neurosis is thought to be a defense maneuver to protect the person against being crowded out by an overwhelming world. The integrated person, on the other hand, knows what he wants and needs from the environment. Thus, he can really make a concernful contact with society, neither by being swallowed up from it nor withdrawing from it completely. He who is the man who recognizes the contact boundary between himself and society, who renders unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's and retains for himself those things that are his own. Perls, 1973. Because the neurotic allows society to impinge upon him too heavily, the person cannot really see his own needs clearly and therefore cannot fulfill them. He is in a state wherein there is difficulty to identify which are the society demands and which are truly his own. The moment the person surrenders everything to the social world he is in, sooner or later he gets lost and alienated from his own organismic regulation. His basic and fundamental needs and wants are uncontaminated. Thus, the person becomes alienated from his or her own being. To summarize, we shall take the definition of neurosis according to Perls, 1973, as it follows. A neurosis is a state of imbalance in the individual that arises when simultaneously he and the group of which he is a member experience different needs and the individual cannot tell which is dominant. If this kind of experience is repeated often enough, if a single experience of this sort is impressive enough, the individual's sense of balance in the field will become sufficiently disturbed so that he loses the ability in any situation to judge the balance position properly. A. Introjection. As what was mentioned earlier in this section, neurotic patterns arise not just from trauma, but also in the daily interferences the person makes to himself. The foremost of these interferences is the process of introjection. In psychoanalytic parlance, the child introjects the moral imperatives of its parents by virtue of the original attachment for them as need-satisfying agents. Hall and Lindsay, 1978. Introjection would mean taking in of the moral demands. Perls' comments clearly state that introjection means preserving the structure of things taken in, whilst the organism requires their destruction. Perls, 1947. Perls, while still in the infant stage of developing Gestalt therapy, studied carefully the role of eating in personality development. From this, he was able to conceptualize a system of therapy which was ever dynamic until the time of his death. Although in his last book, the eating process was no longer given such great importance, he still refers to it for analogy purposes. One can only grow if, in the process of taking in, we digest completely and assimilate thoroughly. But what we swallow whole, what we accept indiscriminately, what we ingest and do not digest, is a foreign body, a parasite that is making its home in us. It is not part of us, even though it may look as if it is still part of the environment. The psychological process of assimilating is very much the same as its physical counterpart. Concepts, facts, standards of behavior, morality, and ethical aesthetics or political values. If we simply accept them whole hog uncritically on someone else's say-so, or because they are fashionable or safe or traditional or unfashionable, dangerous or revolutionary, they lie heavily on us. They are really indigestible. They are really foreign bodies, even though they have taken up residence in our minds. Perls, 1973. The indigested attitudes, ways of acting, feeling, and evaluating are called introjects, and the process of the alien accretions is called introjection. What Perls is trying to stress is that facts and ways of living must be assimilated just like actual food. This means to destructure and analyze, taken apart, and then put them together into a meaningful whole. Having a lot of introjects in our personality would displace true elements of the individual to the point of not recognizing this true needs because it is being blocked by the introjects. As Perls put it with a sense of humor, it makes us something like a house so jam-packed with other possessions that there is no more room for other owners' properties. The problem of introjection is the fact that the person cannot make a good contact with his true nature. The more a person saddles himself with introjects, the less room for him to discover what himself is. Another predicament comes when two incompatible introjects are in the system, like be helpful to others and money is the most important thing. It is a common scene in the Philippines for some rich people to give generously to the church and at the same time cheating their workers. Introjection interferes with the spontaneity of the self, as Perls, Goodman, and Haferline 1951 has worded. The I, which is composed of introject, does not function spontaneously, for it is made up of concepts about the self, duties, standards, and views of human nature imposed from the outside. Projection. Projection is a common experience in everybody. In playing chess, for example, the player will try to assume the role of the opponent and calculate his moves. If I were him, the difference comes from the fact that the chess player only makes assumptions and is conscious of the fact that assumptions may or may not necessarily be true. The other, while the projection tends to actually see in others what most often than not he has not seen in himself. The projector is an individual who cannot accept his feelings and actions because he feels that he should not feel or act that way. The shouldn't, of course, is the basic introject which labels his feelings or actions unpalatable. To resolve the dilemma, he does not recognize his own mischief, but instead attaches it to another person, certainly not to himself. Polster and Polster, 1973. In defining projection, it is a trait, attitude, or bit of behavior which actually belongs to one's own personality, but is not experienced as such. Instead, it is attributed to objects or persons in their environment and then experienced as directed towards the person projecting instead of the other way around. Perls et al. 1951. Instead of saying, I'm angry with you, which is the actual feeling, the projector says, you are angry with me. Or the basketball player who slides while doing a layup goes back and blames the floor. Another very common experience is when a student fails in a subject. Most often, the blame is given to the teacher or the subject. In Gestalt therapy, projection also occurs in the neurotic, not only with his dealings with the world outside his person, he also uses it unto himself. The person who is so irritated with his bladder, for example, because it wants to urinate and at the wrong time, is an example of this kind of projection. It here denotes a segregation from the whole I, when actually, and in reality, I is the one responsible for not urinating earlier. The projector gives them, as it were, an objective existence outside himself so that he can make them responsible for his troubles without facing the fact that they are part of him. Instead of being an active participant of his own life, the projector becomes a passive object, a victim of circumstance. Perls, 1973. C. Confluence. When there is no boundary between an entity from the other, the relationship between these entities is said to be confluent. Confluence means absence of boundary. In the day-to-day relationship, it is marked by the agreement of not disagreeing, subjugating oneself to the whims of the other. In semantics, this is marked by words we and us, although at times confluence gives individuals with a sense of awe and exaltation, like in the performance of some rituals. This awe stems from the very fact that normally individuals experience the other boundary sharply, and the temporary abrogation has a tremendous impact. But when the sense of utter identification is chronic and the individual is unable to see the difference between himself and the rest of the world, he is psychologically sick. Perls, 1973. This person will have difficulty in experiencing himself because he has lost all sense of himself. The confluent person can hardly differentiate himself from the others. Thus, in principle, he cannot really make a good contactful situation. In our culture, we have a trait called pakikisama, the attitude of going with a group or person one wishes. In this instance, it is a common experience that there sometimes is a sidestepping of individual concerns just to please the other group. In confluence, one demands likeness and refuses to tolerate any differences. The maladaptiveness of the situation is in fact self-evident. Two people in reality could never be alike in everything, especially in terms of wants and wishes. D. Retroflection. Retroflection literally means turning back sharply against. When a person retroflects behavior, he does to himself what originally he did or tried to do to the other person or objects. He stops directing various energies outward in attempts to manipulate and brings about changes in the environment that will satisfy his needs instead. He redirects activity inwards and substitutes himself in the place of the environment as the target or of behavior. To the extent that he does this, he splits his personality into doer and done to. Perls et al. 1951. The mechanics of this behavior is rather quite complex. As children, when we were more free to express ourselves, there were some behavior which others see as undesirable in us. If punishment is the response, most of this intervention does not really annihilate the undesirable behavior. The individual learns, however, to hold back such behavior until this holding back becomes a chronic process. Some people, for example, do not know how to cry. If their behaviors in response to pain are looked more closely, there are certain characteristics such as shortness of breathing or contractions of certain muscles. These contractions are, in a way, the person's mechanism to stop tears from flowing. Since this motor activity has already become chronic, it automatically operates when a person wants to cry. Although the person really wants to cry, he would find it difficult since he has forgotten how to do so. What has happened here is that his constant interruption of tears in the past has become the automatic response. It must be pointed out that his organismic reaction to crying is still not annihilated, only suppressed. The individual, therefore, is in a state of conflict, and his opponent sad to say, is also himself. This person, therefore, is spending a significant amount of energy directed against his own. Thus, there could be not much energy invested outside for proper interaction, functioning, since a lot of it is used up against the self. Retroflection is indeed a self-torture game. It is also quite unfair if we speak of retroflection as something despicable. There are certain impulses that also have to be curtailed, like one's murderous feelings towards a spouse, but it is also equally foolish to strangle oneself because one cannot express or vent his anger out to the partner. The source of retroflection, for some instances, is quite obvious. Retroflection becomes a clear mechanic of neurosis if it is a chronic response to situations. Retroflection disallows expression to the environment but rather releases it to the self. Because of frustration to a boss, a person might decide to drown himself with alcohol. Anger towards father, the son engages in drugs, or worse, is suicide for whatever reason the person thinks. To the neurotics, the self is a beast or an angel, but the self is never myself. Perls, 1973. When the person says, "I will kill myself," the I fails to realize that myself is part of the I, maybe not until too late. To summarize the mechanics of neurosis, the introjector does as others would like him to do. The projector does unto others what he accuses them of doing to him. The man in pathological confluence doesn't know who is doing what to whom, and the retroflector does to himself what he would like to do to others. Perls, 1973. In a way, projection, confluence, and retroflection is affected by the process of introjection. To take a certain impulse, anger, and disowning it from the self while projecting it in others can be traced to the introject. I should not be angry. For confluence, we should not quarrel. For retroflection, I should not do anything to hurt others. When these maxims are not properly assimilated, they are also not understood. For this lack of understanding, one cannot really apply them with a sense of appropriateness and flexibility. Only when these interjects are digested and properly assimilated can they become truly part of the person. How many maxims in different forms try to rule the lives of people which are truly not assimilated? One can just imagine its magnitude if one really looks closely. No wonder neurosis is a very pervasive malady today.